Welcome back to the Four Podmen and Dynamos Dozen, the wrestling podcast we bring you each and every week on the Dynamo Podcast Network. Head over to YouTube, smash that subscribe and bell notification button. Audio versions show are always available through Spotify or wherever you pick up audio versions of the show. And if you'd like to contact the show, you'll get us on Twitter at @TPodmen. You'll get us on Facebook and Instagram, the Four Podmen, also Dynamos Dozen as well, I believe. And we shall get into this November the 13th. Always a very tough day for wrestling fans. Of course, my partner on the podcast, as always, Ian the Dynamo Kelly. How are we, Ian?
Good, man. Yeah, it's kind of one of those mad weekends, wasn't it? It's kind of one of those bittersweet things. You have a great pay-per-view last night, and then when you see those little Levy tributes within it, you kind of always remember like what how much of a loss I guess he was to the wrestling business. So I suppose when I reached out to you yesterday, it was kind of a case where right, we have to do this. We probably expected a bigger panel, but it's probably a good thing that it's just the two of us. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, like, where do we begin with this guy? This is a guy who had it all and more. He was the epitome of a complete performer in this business. He had everything from promo, heel, face, ring savvy, moves. He was just an incredible person, wasn't he, really?
Yeah, look, I suppose I know as a host, it's probably difficult for you. So, like, that's why you need someone, like when you're doing a show like this, that's probably why it's good to maybe let me kind of start from where I was first introduced to Eddie. I remember I was first introduced to Eddie from one of the first WCW games, believe it or not, which I think was either on a PlayStation or, yeah, I think it was PlayStation. And I saw the get up, was just all white, with the lightning bolts going down. It was that stereotypical 1980s gear that all the lads wore, Dynamite Kid, Owen Hart, And I saw this guy with the mustache, Latino looking fella, Eddie Guerrero. And for whatever reason, whatever look he had, I was like, I went with him. I was like, I'll pick him. And that's how I kind of started learning. Then reading the magazines, I'd see a lot more of him. And you're talking here now, like 94, 95, when I first would have seen him in magazines. But then the game, obviously, when he went to WCW, it was a different story. But I mean, you would see them in the magazines, tape trading over here, for lads my age. It was rare because you wouldn't really get enough fans that were like-minded to get the tapes to trade. You know what I mean? So I had the tapes. It was like someone trading with me. So I was trading with myself. But yeah, I remember seeing, then I got hold, as I say, that game I think came out in about 95, maybe 96, 97. And that's when I first really saw him. But then at around that time, just before the screw job and all, I did start managing to get hold of a lot of WCW stuff because I was able to, purchase it through Power Slam magazine and all that. And it was, Jesus Christ, it was incredible watching this guy. I was like, Jesus, he's a different kind of breed, especially when you were watching with Art Barr and all that kind of stuff, when they had the whole USA get up. But when you really saw some of his early stuff, you could see he was such a dynamic performer. So he was kind of one of those guys, kind of along with Benoit, that I always kind of heard a lot about, and Malenko heard a lot about, but I didn't get to see a lot of. I was just reading about their matches through magazines. You know what I mean? And I'm sure you were in the same boat at that time. It was very hard to get hold of stuff like that because it wasn't on our network television anymore. Unless you had TNT in 95, 96, which not a lot of people did. So yeah, that was kind of my first introduction to the likes of Eddie Guerrero. And then obviously once Brett was over in WCW, then I found a way to get it because I realized my uncle had TNT and it was there all along. I was like, shit, I could have been doing this for years. And then when I did finally see him, it was like you saw the looks of him and Jericho and Malenko and Benoit, and you were like, okay. But I'm gonna have note this down, put a pin in this one. I'm gonna talk about my comparisons with him and Benoit later, and some people are gonna be surprised with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have a couple of stories to share later as well, but I'll
Yeah,
save them for
exactly.
later.
Yeah, exactly.
Just,
We don't want to give everything away.
yeah, but it was just, there's like nearly an aura of a performer that comes through the screen at you, and you connect with him, and and it's like as if he teleports you to that place, and he brings you along with him, and kind of never drops you or lets you go. And the weird thing about Eddie Guerrero is, although we were fans of him and stuff like that, and this could get emotional for me without a shadow of a doubt, because I get upset about
Me
this
too.
every year.
Me too.
But
Yeah.
it's only when they're gone that you turn around and you go, now what? And it's like a moment in time, and like we'll get on to, we'll touch on obviously some of his career without a shadow of a doubt. But that moment at WrestleMania 20 in the ring with Benoit, and they both have the belts. They've both climbed to the top of the mountain. That was insurmountable for these guys when you think about it. And the confetti coming down, and to see them both so happy for each other and the success. And they both just look at each other, and the love in both their eyes for each other in that moment in that ring is just, it's a moment in time for wrestling that sticks with me. I mean, we talk about Hogan slamming Andre, we talk about Austin at Mania, we talk about all these different moments, but that moment for me sums up wrestling to me as a fan. And it's a rare moment, and I don't think for me it's ever been repeated in terms of its importance, um, both for fans and also for people who aspire to be wrestlers or work in the wrestling business. That moment, transcends it really for me.
Yeah. And I'll take over from you for a bit because I know you're getting emotional there. And like it's one of them. Like it's one of them. I remember that well, Madison Square Garden. Eddie with the boot. Um, just to bring a bit of light to it, just to show his genius, obviously. With the boot slipping off and him getting the belt. That's the one we're talking about, obviously. And then obviously Benoit with the triple threat against Michaels and Hunter. I mean, for these guys, this was kind of, and you're right, this is something that's not meant to happen, especially in this particular company in WWE. This is not meant to happen, and I think we saw a time there throughout the kind of maybe, yeah, I suppose the noughties, the kind of early noughties up to the early 2000s, where you were seeing these guys finally, hard work was paying off. And I don't know whether it was a case that, I thought about this long and hard today. It was a case that, like Vince was saying, right, well, we're going to give you your due for your hard work. Now, it was almost like they only got one or two moments in the sun, and then that was it. Kind of like we saw with Ray and stuff like that. And then it was back onto the big guys. But regardless of that, this was their moment. And like, for two guys who are, basically 5'10" and under, making it in the big man sport in the mecca of pro wrestling in Madison Square Garden. That's where the emotion comes from, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's when you look at both of them in the ring and the confetti coming down, and you actually realize who's backstage, all the stars that are backstage, all the performers that are backstage, and that whole show, that whole road to WrestleMania, the build up crescendo at this moment with those two boys, and whoever was backstage, it didn't matter. It was just so surreal, and it's a moment that sticks with me every year, and every time his anniversary comes up, that's the moment I go to.
Yeah, this is one of the, I think, aside from when I was younger, obviously Owen, and Dynamite passing, this is kind of the one, and obviously Harley now recently. But I think when you're looking at guys so young, more so, still at the top of their game, I think the Owen one and the Eddie one are almost on a par, aren't they, for different reasons? And every time those ones come around, it's a very odd feeling about it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I called you yesterday morning and we said like we need to do this Eddie show, and you were like, "Oh shit, I thought it was tomorrow." And I was like, "Yeah, no, it's today." And it was only because I happened to be going through Twitter, and I was like, "Shit, this is going to be a big show tonight." And obviously, we're talking about the AEW Full Gear show.
Yeah.
And they kind of a lot of I think I've seen CM Punk and a few lads like, and a lot of the younger guys going, "This show is for Eddie tonight." You know what I mean? That's how big an impact this guy had. And I suppose if this was documentary form, Niall, to kind of keep your tears a little bit back, and maybe you can do it at the end. If this was documentary form, it's like that show where we see the end, but now we go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, they show the end, but then we need to get to the story before people who are probably just watching us for the first time realizing, Jesus, who was this guy that's so important?
Yeah, I think we can talk about his time in Mexico and stuff like that, and the time that he spent obviously in Japan with Benoit and Malenko and stuff like that. That stuff is stuff of legendary status, really, and I would encourage anyone to go back and go through it and enjoy it. But when you go into WCW, and
that's where the story begins, really.
That's where the platform is created when he goes in there. Probably ECW as well, I'd imagine. But when he moves into WCW, himself and Ray and Benoit, Jericho, Malenko, all these guys, these were the guys. This was the mid card that was really the upper card out of position. And these were the guys that are, till this day, they're described as the guys who were the workers on this show. These were the guys that built the foundation for this show. And then obviously after that, then you had the Hogans and the Stings and the Nashes and all these guys.
Do you know the tweet that got me yesterday? Do you know the tweet that actually got me? You know the way there's always one thing that someone says that makes you go, shit, I need a minute. Yeah. I swear to God. And the tweet that got me was the Bischoff one. Bischoff put up a tweet saying, rest in peace, my friend. The next coffee's on me.
Yeah.
And I knew what that meant, for anybody, and that's where you're going to go with this, obviously, because, but that know what I mean by that now, because obviously Eddie had that famous promo, but like, I know it's a weird one. Someone could write the loveliest poem and all that stuff, but for me, it was just, I suppose, as someone that kind of likes Bischoff and what he done with that company.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, that one got me.
Yeah, well, you see it right through his career. The stuff that these guys were involved in, it didn't matter the dynamic of the match or the dynamic of the opponent. They made it main event status every single time. Didn't matter what it was. And it was the kind of thing that those following them found it very hard to follow them because it really was main event stuff.
How could you? I mean, like that Halloween Havoc, people talk about it to this day. Like that Rey Mysterio Halloween Havoc 1997.
Unbelievable.
I'll be honest with you. You'll find it hard pressed to get a better, just for the type of match that it is, just non-stop action.
Yeah.
It's not your kind of massive story being told as such. But if you want to just look at two guys that are top of their game, I doubt there's a wrestling fan listening to this that hasn't seen it. But does that not sum up what this guy was doing early on?
Oh, it was incredible. Like, it was just when you look, I mean, that match has been described as the epitome of a wrestling match, and without a shadow of a doubt, that doesn't even do it justice. You know what I mean? But then, you see it with these guys. Then obviously they got very frustrated. You know what I mean? Because everyone talks about this glass ceiling, and everyone knows that the power that was held there between, Bischoff and Hogan and Luger and Piper and Sting and Nash and all these guys, you know what I mean? So these guys realized that they had to make a move, you know what I mean? And
we'll leave Piper out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like it's
no, it's true. It's true.
Yeah. These guys were working so much and working so hard, you know what I mean? And 31st of January 2000, the Radicals appear. You know what I mean? And that for me was like, I was looking at this going, what the hell? You know what I mean? This was amazing,
it's funny, even though I was still on my hiatus from WWE at that time, where I think I went back and watched a little bit because of Jericho, because at the time I kind of learned to be a Jericho fan through watching Nitro. You know, when you start watching a new show and you're like, oh, I like that guy, because you're seeing a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I remember Jericho was kind of a guy that I was like, he's a little bit different. I like him. He's got a good look, and he's hail from Calgary, Alberta. So see, I'm a Flames guy, as everyone can see. So I was kind of like, okay, this guy's got some chops about him. But so I kind of start watching stuff with Jericho again on WWE. I'd kind of given up a little bit on the business before I got into it. But I remember sitting there, funny enough you say that, I remember sitting there one Saturday morning and my brothers were watching the wrestling. And I was like, what's this? And it was, the usual SmackDown, they give you the highlights and whatnot. And there's the Radicals. I just saw Benoit's head and everything. I had just previously, I'd known about Benoit obviously beating Sid for the world title. And I was like, that was only a couple of weeks ago. And obviously that wasn't good enough for him. And Vince brought them over. Obviously Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and Chris Benoit. Yeah.
It was just, it was an incredible time, and in they came in, and Eddie, he was one of those guys. He was so in tune with the business. But if you remember his first match was the one where he dislocated his elbow off the frog splash, and then he was out for a little period of time. But then he came back, and off starts. We get the crush on China and the Latino heat, and there's moments. There's moments in his WWE career, and look, we could sit here for 6 hours reminiscing on matches and stuff like that. Most people out there know the
periods,
shadow of a doubt in periods. But you had the Latino heat, you had the Los Guerreros, you had the Viva la Raza, you had the Light Cheat and Steel, you had all those things all the time. And it was just every time he moved up an inch, it was just more and more and more. Like I remember, and not skipping across. I mean, he won the European belt a number of times. He lay down for China. But he knew, and that was groundbreaking at the time. China pinning Eddie Guerrero, but he knew at the time that it wouldn't hurt him because he was such a performer, and he knew he had the crowd in his hand and stuff like that and all. And just some of the stuff he did. I remember going back even, that time when they all moved to SmackDown, remember, and the matches on SmackDown and the Los Guerreros, and when tag team wrestling at the time was the forgotten art, and then along came Los Guerreros, and then you Team Angle, and you had all these other teams, and tag team wrestling was red hot again. It was main event stuff again. We were so enthralled by it again, and it was down to him and obviously Chavo as well, like, who was exceptional at the time as well. And it was just unbelievable at that time. SmackDown was red hot. Like, and I just remember those early 2000s. As we go through those early 2000s, wrestling was red hot then at the time, even with these new guys coming in,
Yeah, I think when you look at those four guys as well, like Eddie was the natural born performer out of a lot of them in terms of being able to be kind of charismatic and be a promo guy and stuff like that. And because I think with Saturn, he was just an oddball but a great worker. Do you know what I mean? And he was doing that whole thing with the mop and all that kind of stuff. And Dean Malenko was messing about with he was messing out with one of the birds as well. One of the girls, fucking can't remember who it was. Lita or something, or was it? No, he was doing something with someone mad. I can't remember at that time, but Benoit was just going in having these matches. Whereas I think when you looked at Guerrero, he was kind of the all-round package out of these guys, even though they were all at a similar height and a similar build. And it's actually funny. You see how small, I say small, but in shape. Eddie was like in shape at that time. But you see, he was a lot smaller than he got to later on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I'm convinced helped, cut his life short, to be honest with you, a little bit, if I'm being honest. Yeah, they were great times. I mean, you continue there because I have my I have my bits in my head that I know where I want to go with this and
absolutely,
who
yeah.
I want to compare them to and stuff like that. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd a number of runs in there. I mean, WrestleMania 17, you had the European match with Test and stuff like that and all, and like, you could see what was building even there at that time. But then, May 2001, he enters rehab. And then in November, the company release him. And this is where
That's the one. That's the bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and that for me was a tough one as well, because it was kind of like, it was kind of a moment that kind of drifted off, you know what I mean? And it was just kind of, this next segment that I'm going to talk about is the one that he doesn't get near enough credit. But as you said on Full Gear the other night, he got a lot of credit for this. And the reason he got a lot of credit for this is a lot of the guys performing in those rings, these were the guys he built up when he went out on the independent scene. That's rarely, that's rarely known. That's rarely known by wrestling fans, because a lot of wrestling fans, WCW, WWF, WWE, that type of thing, they didn't really. But I was a big Ring of Honor fan.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, he got his life in order. He went back out in the independent scene, and he had a drive to get himself back there to where he wanted to be. He wasn't going to let life beat him in any way, and he had taken quite a fall. And he went into Ring of Honor. Gabe Sapolsky brought him into Ring of Honor, and like, he worked with Christopher Daniels. His matches with Super Crazy are just, they're exactly that. They're super crazy. And CM Punk, he had rivalries in there. Rey Mysterio, his matches with Psychosis, my God. You know what I mean?
To be honest with you, I would actually even say the stuff that he would have with the likes of Psychosis and stuff is stuff that we've seen in WWE. When I go back, I wasn't the biggest CM Punk fan, as you know, when I was younger. When I go back and I look at the stuff that he was doing with CM Punk, the amount, I'd say, of the learning tree stuff that CM Punk was exposed to just by being in the presence and in the ring with Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah.
Really brought him on tenfold. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, that was, I think that was a really pivotal moment. And I'm glad you brought that up. That was a pivotal moment. Yeah. And obviously his comeback then is
legendary. But I mean, that it really, like, if people want to go back and look at the stuff in Ring of Honor, I would encourage you to go back and look at it, because he really legitimized and brought attention to that company. And we see that company now, and it's kind of drifting off now. It's let go of its employees and stuff like that, and it wants to take restock and rethink. And COVID has obviously hit it badly. And I would also emphasize it's one of the companies out there that paid all its employees through the pandemic and stuff like that. So big card off the Ring of Honor, hats off the Ring of Honor, 100%. Yeah. And I think he's not often associated with the foundation and the success of that company. Boy, did he go in there, and absolutely worked his back end off with these guys and stuff like that. So I wanted to bring that up because I think it's really important. That gap between WWE Part 1 and WWE Part 2, it's really important to fill that void. That, like, this is what he was doing. He was going out there to reprove himself again, to re-kickstart his career, coming back out of rehab and getting everything going again. And I think it's really important that we brought that up. And that's why you touched on AEW. And the mark of respect that those people have for him. That's because those guys were there firsthand in that time frame and stuff like that. So it's really important.
I just wanted to add to that as well, if I could.
Yep.
There was this little stigma, because I mean, this is around the time when I had got into the business over here in Ireland and the UK and whatnot. And I remember there was always this stigma that some people would say, right, some of these guys can work within the WWE environment. Can they work outside of the WWE environment? Spots being called, blah, blah, blah. If they go onto the indie scenes, what way are they going to work, whatnot? Obviously, anybody who knows anything about Eddie Guerrero would not even question that. However, he was going out and having these matches that were probably better than some of the matches he got to have in WWE because of how you need to work within the WWE kind of, I suppose, regime, if you want to call it. And he was literally going out and lending knowledge and passing that down to the young guys. And I think that's what people need to realize when they talk about a CM Punk or a Jericho and why they're there. instead of kind of blasting them just because, oh, they don't look like they used to in 2021. Well, guess what, kid? You don't look like them ever. For all those lads out there calling Jericho fat, you're a fucking idiot. Like I saw some fans with like, signs, and I do want to cut a promo here on some of these idiots, just as human beings. You're not a wrestling fan. You're a fucking idiot. Quite clearly, you've got issues in your own head that you need to fucking sort out before you start throwing things out like that. Because these are the same people then will have their own issues, mental health issues and stuff like that, that will then be seeking help from other people. But just because these people are famous, don't think it doesn't affect them. You know what I mean? We've seen it in Japan with that young kid that, did take her life because of the abuse that she was getting online. Don't be so quick to start fucking judging people on their look and their, the physique. I just wanted to say that.
But see, absolutely. But the thing about that is what people don't realize, Jericho sometimes does these things on purpose just to work the audience. He's working with inside the work, and he laps it up.
But he's a strong mind though. But there might be someone out there that isn't.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There might be someone out there that isn't. So it's just little things that I notice, and it seems to be wrestling fans that like it's the only it's the only kind of industry I know that you see in a live environment that people think they have the right to start shouting out on someone's appearance, which is fair enough. If you're a heel or a baby face, that's what it is. And I get it. Oh, you fat bastard. Like some lads go out and that's their gimmick. You know what I mean? It's their gimmick. But no, I just thought it's and I'm not, and people probably aren't expecting this from me. I'm usually the one giving out about snowflakes and cancel culture and stuff like that. But I do think there's a limit, there's a line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But with these guys, Guerrero was actually going out and he was like literally passing on that knowledge, and that was the point that I was at before I went on a tangent. There is that the likes of Jericho and him, CM Punk now are there to try and, obviously Punk is there for a different reason. He is going to be big gold and stuff like that eventually. But the reason Punk probably got to that level, because he was never meant to get to that level, the same way Guerrero wasn't meant to get to that level, the same way Jericho wasn't meant to get to that level. So this all comes back again to Guerrero and what he done for a lot of that indie scene that are now there. The Colt Cabanas, as you said, the CM Punks, a lot of other guys that I probably can't remember off the top of my head.
Christopher Daniels.
This is what Christopher Daniels, yeah, right. who has in turn passed the knowledge down to other people. So Guerrero is kind of one of those rare kind of guys, commodities that had the experience from kind of the late 80s all through the 90s on the indies there, where he was wrestling, in Japan, wrestling in ECW and in Puerto Rico and all these crazy arenas, that was able to bring that in then to the noughties. You know what I mean? And it's just, I've always said it in pro wrestling, you fucking pass it down. You always pass it down for the next generation. And I think the reason that Eddie, if someone asked me why is Eddie so revered, this is one of the main reasons.
Well, Eddie was one of those guys that even early in his career, he was always passing it down. His goal was always, I mean, we've spoke on this podcast so many times, about how you go in and you have a match with Finn Balor, and regardless of the result of the match, you always come out better for it. Eddie Guerrero was the blueprint for that, really, you know what I mean? And he was also the blueprint. He was also the blueprint for wrestlers who, that if they did fall off the wagon and they did go through a tough time, that you can come back, you can rebuild your career, you can go out on the indie scene, you can make a name for yourself, and you can create a version 2 of yourself and be highly successful. And I just remember when he went into WWE again, I mean, like, he kicked it out of the park straight away with those 3 matches he had with Rob Van Dam were just incredible.
Similar to Drew, isn't it?
Yeah, there is parallels there, definitely, with Drew and stuff like that. Absolutely. But I just think with Eddie, I think Eddie I don't think there's a darker place you could go to than where he went to. So his comeback is so monumental. And I'm not saying that any other person hasn't gotten to that dark place either. But, you know, he went through those matches with Van Damme that were unbelievable. I remember them well, you know, and Van Damme as well, such a performer and stuff like that. And like, this was really the battle of the frog splashes, really, wasn't it, when you think about it, and when we look back on it.
I remember them well, yeah, I remember them.
But then, of course, here was Eddie Guerrero. This was the growth of Eddie Guerrero coming back in now. He was pinned to go into a storyline with Stone Cold Steve Austin. And of course, we know what happened there. Austin had a falling out with McMahon and he went home. And then Eddie was dropped back into limbo again, kind of in mid-card. But that didn't deter Eddie from doing what he wanted to do. You know what I mean? Eddie seeing that as being just another challenge to be overcome. And I mean, that's how he came back with that fire in his belly and wanting to succeed and go at it. And it was a monumental time, you know what I mean? Because Austin just going like that was crazy, you know what I mean? But then he went in, of course, and of course he's teaming with his good friend Chris Benoit, and they were feuding with Bubba Ray. And then he had memorable matches in there with The Rock. If you remember the July 22nd episode of Raw, that match with The Rock was incredible. And then we move in. Then, of course, we had this is where the brand switching and all came in and stuff like that and all, you know. And, you know, 2002 to January 2003, some of those matches on SmackDown, if you remember back then, SmackDown was Raw back then.
It was
the blue brand was the red brand back then, you know what I mean? And that stuff he did in there, the magic that they created, him, Edge, Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, Benoit, Chavo, all those guys. And this is where we get into this whole Los Guerreros thing that I mentioned earlier. And how are these guys going to turn around and take tag team wrestling and make it main event status again? And they knocked it out of the park. If you think back to that time, Los Guerreros, Team Angle, all these different teams that were in there. It was just an incredible time for tag team wrestling. The art that we thought was gone. You know what I mean? That like it ended with the Hart Foundation and the Bulldogs, Demolition and Powers of Pain and the Road Warriors and all this. But these guys brought it back and it was super cool again. You know what I mean?
Well, let's take a little pause for the cause after I say this. And there's a reason that I want to take a pause. But there's a reason that I want to say this beforehand. Eddie had that experience in tag team wrestling with Art Barr.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was such a loss to him as well. He had that. You know, in AAA, you know, they were doing it pretty much everywhere, all around the indie circuits, bar, WWE. He had that experience. So, I mean, for him, this was probably okay.
Second nature.
Easy work, baby. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Good Lord.
Yeah. Well, we'll take a quick break. And we're back discussing the man, Eddie Guerrero. July 2003, he defeats Chris Benoit in the finals of a tournament to be crowned United States champion. And here we see this is the development. This is building towards Eddie Guerrero, the WWE champion. Has some great feuds, of course, with John Cena, to name but a few, and the Big Show. But then he wins the SmackDown Royal Rumble. And as fans, we're so excited about this and we're thinking, here we go. Is it going to happen? Will they follow through? Are they going to push this man to the top of the mountain, or are they just bringing us on the journey for the sake of it? February the 15th in the Cow Palace in San Francisco. No way out. He gets his shot against Brock Lesnar. And anyone who remembers anything about wrestling back then, he wins the belt. And that moment when you see him draped across the family and the fans, his mother, his brothers, and he's there with the belt and the smile from ear to ear. And I think there's kind of disbelief there. It's like as if he's in this dream that he's sharing with us all, like defeating Brock Lesnar for the belt. And you know, hats off to Brock. What a match. Unbelievable back then.
Phenomenal match. I mean, like it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like a similar journey, isn't it, to the likes of a Bret Hart, to be honest with you. You know, like, I'm not supposed to be beating these big guys. It's like you always hear Bret when he talks about winning the belt first. It didn't really, he beat Ric Flair for it, but it didn't seem like he won the belt or he was the guy. You know, whereas because it wasn't on a pay-per-view or anything, it was just on, like, it was like, we need Flair gone.
Yeah.
Throw
what we call throwaway TV.
Yeah. You know what I mean? It's on a Silver Vision show. Whereas I think with Guerrero, this was like a big pay-per-view win for him. And it was like, wow, he beat Brock. Brock was basically the new Ultimate Warrior, it was kind of the new Ultimate Warrior more so. You know what I mean? Because they still had Cena was still there. He was their guy. Had Rock gone at that point? I think.
Yeah, close to it anyway. Yeah,
or close to it.
Yeah.
But Brock, Cena, and Orton were the guys. They were the new big guys. But unlike Warrior, they could work. So they were like, he had these guys and Brock was the epitome. You know what I mean? He was the guy that you just couldn't beat. And how we're not expecting little 5'8" Eddie Guerrero to go and beat 6'3" Viking man himself, Brock Lesnar. But sure enough, he did it.
Yeah, and this was the match where we seen the layers of Brock Lesnar that existed, because he spent time. Remember, he was putting on the sombrero, and he was totally taking the piss out of Mexican culture and everything and all. And and then you had Eddie there playing up to it as well. But you knew with Eddie, that glint in Eddie's eye, he knew where he was focused and stuff like that. And it was the thing that Brock kind of missed. But I always remember Brock coming down on I think it was an episode of SmackDown or something like that. And he came out with one of those Mexican bands, like one of the ones you'd see in Breaking Bad or something, that the three guys, what do you call it, the maracas or maraca bands or something like that, whatever they're called, something like that, yeah. But I remember Brock came out and he was always wore the black bottoms like The Rock, the tracksuit bottoms with the cut off black t-shirt. And he had the black sombrero on him with the white tassels hanging down over, and he was doing all the Mexican dance down the ring to the ring and all and stuff like that. And I just remember Eddie just lapping it up, like it was just. It was like as if Eddie was nearly coaching him, going, this is where you need to go to with this kind of thing. You know what I mean? And it was so out of kilter for Brock as well, because Brock was just the beast, the monster, you know what I mean? But to see Brock going down deep and dirty like that, it's like some of the recent times with Brock, when you see him dancing with the Ghetto Blast or the Money in the Bank thing and all, and you see there's still little shades of him there that can come back and stuff like that. And if we only got more of it, it'd be brilliant.
And it all stems from his time with Eddie.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we move on to something that we spoke about earlier. We hit WrestleMania 20. And he has an unbelievable match against Kurt Angle to retain his belt. And it was incredible. And I mean, Kurt Angle will tell you on his own show and on his own videos that he's done and stuff like that. Eddie Guerrero, when you mention this guy, people just tear up, And
it's funny, isn't it? Like that, Eddie Guerrero had no fear of these guys because he was quite hot tempered. He could lose it. And I remember Kurt saying, like, "Do you really want to go here, Eddie?" And Eddie was like, "Come on, bring it to me, bro."
Yeah.
And it was like, no, you need to go home, leave it.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't even. Kurt is like, I don't want to hurt this guy. I like this guy.
Yeah.
But man, I'm gonna say this now. At a time where I was kind of a Benoit fan because I was such a Dynamite fan at the time. When I actually look back at the two careers, for me, there's only Guerrero. And I'm not saying this because of what Benoit done or anything. The difference with Eddie Guerrero and Benoit is tenfold. And I'll tell you why. I mean, the charisma that Eddie Guerrero had, he could do whatever the company needed him to do in terms of like cut promos. He could be a nasty son of a bitch as well if he needed to be, as we saw with his stuff with Rey Mysterio. With I'm your papi and all, you know what I mean? You were like, oh my God, you little bastard.
Yeah. The Dominic stuff.
And
got real deep.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas I look at look at Benoit and it's like listen, Benoit's phenomenal. I'm not taking that away from Benoit, but Benoit's a carbon copy of someone else. Do you know what I mean? Like literally a carbon copy of someone else. And we know that's Dynamite Kid. He built his life. I mean, he might have done some stuff different later on than Dynamite, but fundamentally that's what he was. He was a carbon copy of Dynamite Kid. Whereas Eddie Guerrero had all those skills and then some.
Yeah.
Like he was able to he was able to mix and match with everyone. He could do that mat-based stuff if he needed to with the likes of Kurt Angle or Benoit. But then he could bring you into laughter. He could bring you into tears. He could bring you into fucking, I want to choke this son of a bitch. You know what I mean? I think Eddie Guerrero, I'll be honest with you, if he's not in the top 5, greatest of all time in terms of just everything that he's done, I think there's something wrong. Do you know what I mean?
He's probably one of the most complete performers in our generation. And that's how I would put him up there in terms of, there was no weak points in this man. The only weak points he had, was some of his demons and stuff like that. And it's well documented and stuff like that. And he went to rehab, got that resolved. And then he did what he had to do. And it's just one of those things when you see him. I remember even when I'm thinking back now, I'm thinking back to Benoit getting ready for his match, and Benoit strutting up and down the locker room. And Eddie goes in. Eddie has the belt on his shoulder. I think it was 20, definitely. And he goes, all right, 20, yeah. All right, Holmes. All right, all this kind of thing to him, And of course, Benoit is up to 90 switched on, you know what I mean? And Eddie to him, I believe, and they're going back at each other. And Eddie has him fired up going out to the match. And I just thought it was incredible the way Eddie worked. He just worked. He just, I don't even know how to put it into words to say that he got it, but he got it, and he got more and more and more and more. And he got the business in a way that very few people have ever gotten, in terms of he could drive you insane and you're still going to the merch stand to buy his t-shirt without a shadow of a doubt.
I think the only other one that came from that WCW time, along with him, is Jericho.
Yeah.
And even at that, I still think even Jericho would probably admit himself. Guerrero belt the bell, I believe is, I think he's better than Benoit. I think he's better than people. I can believe I'm saying this. I think he's better than Benoit because he's original. And I was the biggest Benoit mark, but when I go back, because I've spent a bit of time over the last 24 hours looking back at some of his stuff, even with Kurt Angle. His work with Kurt Angle, good Lord, he could match you on the ground. He can fly. He can do absolutely everything. He really is the epitome of an all-rounder. You want to talk about Shawn Michaels and an all-rounder? You look at Shawn Michaels' work now today, and then match it versus Eddie Guerrero's. I think one stands up more than the other. And I know that's going to be controversial, but I think it's very true.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of the length of the career and stuff like that and all, but
But I'm talking about the in-ring work only in terms of Eddie's role. I think. Yeah. Well, listen, the length of the careers pretty much simultaneous, really. Yeah. It's just one was in the spotlight a little bit longer. So, I suppose, before people shoot me down and want to, say that I'm just disrespecting Shawn Michaels, no. Context is king, as Mr. Bischoff says.
We're in an opinion business.
We are in an opinion business, and the aspect that I'm coming at it from is that they're two very, very similar performers, in the sense that they can do both. You know what I mean? But one was just in the WWE spotlight for longer than the other. Whereas if you go back and look at the other's body of work in different companies, that's what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? This isn't a WWE podcast here. So let people remember that. If you want to compare two people, or you want to have the debate, because it is a debate and it is an opinion basis. But if you get a load of videotapes, my age is shining through here. We don't need videotapes anymore. But if you go get a load of footage of stuff from Eddie from the start of his career to the end of his career and get it from Michael's perspective all the way up, they both were in tag teams. They both came from that lucha libre style of training. And they both were well versed in the mat ground stuff and the technical wrestling stuff. All I'm saying is I think when you look at it, I think Eddie's, for me, holds up more so today.
Eddie's body of work stands up to anyone in the business.
Anybody.
Yeah.
That goes for Bret Hart too, before people would call me out.
So we move on to July, and it's the Great American Bash, and he loses the title to one John Bradshaw Layfield, JBL.
This is my favorite period of Eddie Guerrero, believe it or not. I thought the stuff these two done together was fantastic.
And you only have to see what Eddie Guerrero meant to JBL. If you go back and look at the interview JBL did when Eddie passed, he was absolutely bubbling and distraught. He could barely talk about him. And this is a man, JBL. He's a tough guy. This is a guy
he's a man's man.
Yeah, he hung out with Ron Simmons. He knows what's what.
Listen, his mentor was Stan Hansen, for Christ's sake. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So then Eddie comes back, and we get a repeat. You mentioned it earlier with I'm Your Pappy and Dominic is my child and all this. And we get Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio too, again at the pinnacle of stuff. Not dissimilar to WCW, but Eddie brings it into that real dark place. And this is where you see Eddie when you get down and dirty in the family situation. And he was absolutely brilliant at it. I'm Your Pappy, a t-shirt that sells out to this day.
Yeah. And you know.
Absolutely. Just an incredible time.
What a way to again, let's go into the deeper waters here of what was happening here. Willing to make himself to be that evil bastard, as you said, like stuff that can probably touch on some nerves of families watching this.
Yeah.
But willing to do that for his friend to get him over. So what we see with Eddie Guerrero is he's constantly giving back, isn't he? He's constantly giving back to the business, and not just the business, but the people that deserve it. You know what I mean? And this is Rey Mysterio's time to shine a little bit and get a little bit of promo work and stuff like that. And we see a little Dominic. He's grown up a little bit since, hasn't he?
Just a tad. He now has his own t-shirt, and he's now working away himself, actually. And in fairness to him, doing some good stuff, and there's probably better stuff.
I think he's deadly. Yeah. It's great to see him. Yeah.
So Eddie then moves on, and I mean, we know how close and how tight he became with Batista. I mean, those guys were brothers, somewhat, nearly in the vein of himself and Benoit and Malenko and those guys as well. He saw comfort in Dave Batista, and Dave was close to him, but he goes into a program with Dave for the World Heavyweight title. And they had a great match at No Mercy in October. But unfortunately, as we know, a month later, Eddie had passed, and we never got to see the culmination of that storyline, really, which no doubt would have culminated with Batista dropping the belt to Eddie through respect and honor and everything else. And there's a pivotal moment on SmackDown where the lowrider is there. Batista came out in the lowrider, the famous Eddie Guerrero lowrider. And he gets out of it, and he gives his speech, and he's distraught. The tears are just running down his face like rivers through the shades. And he gets out of the ring, and he just lays the belt on the bonnet of the lowrider. And man, that cut me in two. It absolutely cut me in two. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I thought somewhere along the line we were going to hear that it hadn't happened, and it had. And it that moment, when I go back and look at some of those moments, and just to see these men, huge men and men's men, and they're just broken down, bubbling and distraught like children at the loss of this guy, told me exactly what this man meant to everyone. And then, as you know, we go on then in 2005, and he gets his induction into the Hall of Fame, and rightly so. And the three boys do a stellar job of trying to tell their stories and hold it together. And you could see the pain that the three men were in up there on the Hall of Fame. And I know, because my story about this, and I'll give my two stories. One, I was at that Hall of Fame. And this was when the Hall of Fame, it was in the Rosemont Theater in Chicago. before WrestleMania 22. And if you know the Rosemont Theatre, it really is an old school theatre. It only holds about, I think, 3,000 people. And that's when the Hall of Fame back then wasn't the big corporate franchise stadium thing that it is now. It was close, like the public who got tickets for it, we sat beside the wrestlers. We weren't taken away from them and stuff like that. And I remember we were queuing up outside to go into the Rosemont Theatre, and WWE people came over to us and they gave us all a red rose. And the Guerrero family pulled up and they got out of the limousines. His mother, Chavo's uncle, who people would know from WWE TV, and they came over to the queue to us and we presented them all with red roses, which to me was an absolute honor and one that I'll remember forever. But I was also, the day before, I was at a signing. It was called a Midday Madness, and I was at a signing, and one of the guys on it was Chavo Guerrero. And I was wearing the Eddie tribute T-shirt that they did. I think it was the black one, remember, with the silhouette of him, and I had the dates and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was wearing that T-shirt, and I remember talking to Chavo Guerrero. I said, "How are you, man?" And he said, "How are you?" And I had told him we had traveled over from Ireland because it meant so much to us. And I was wearing the T-shirt, and he shook my hand, and we both kind of had a moment where we said nothing to each other, but we knew. And just as we stopped shaking hands, he turned around to me and he said, "Thank you so much." And I said, "Mate, the honor is all mine." Absolutely. I said that this is the least I could do for that guy. And that was a tough day for me. Tough day for me.
Yeah. I suppose hearing that, I try and gather my thoughts a little bit.
Yeah.
It was kind of one of those things, wasn't it? Because I remember Raw and it coming on very early. That was when it was announced, if you recall. I remember just turning on Raw and going stiff, like going, what? You know, like it was so different to, you know, as I said, it was like Owen Hart all over again, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's still, I mean, I watched the show last night and I had no real interest in, you know, in the 5-man tag or whatever it was, street fight. But when it came to the end with Jericho, that was right in the feels. Because you could see Jericho just kept looking up and done the frog splash, and you know, you could see the boys coming in and comforting him and stuff like that. And you could tell he was gone, like, you know what I mean?
We're 16 years on and it's still so raw.
Yep.
So his legacy. How do we sum up his legacy? I would basically say one of phenomenal matches, incredible lows, and tremendous heights. He was the complete wrestler of his generation, and his work lives on forever.
I can't really add on to that. I think what you said in terms of the complete wrestler of his generation is exactly what I was alluding to earlier. I think only him and Kurt Angle have that, are the only two in that conversation, right?
Yeah.
So,
Eddie Guerrero, again, another year. We salute you. We remember you fondly. And we thank you for everything that you provided for us. Until next time, people, this has been Dynamos Dozen and the Four Podmans look back at Eddie Guerrero on his anniversary. No doubt we'll do this every year and we'll figure out a different way of doing it every year. It's 16 years on and it's still as raw as hell. And in another 16 years, if we're still around, we'll be on and it'll still be as raw as hell. Until next time, you know where to go. we don't need to be telling you where to go at this stage. It is, of course, YouTube and Spotify. Get over there and support us as best you can. And we will leave it at that. Till next time, folks. Appreciate you viewing and listening. Cheers, bud.
Cheers, bro.